So, welcome, Alexander. It's great to have you with us in this special series of interviews with men for November. So, yeah, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a genuine pleasure to be here.
I'm really excited because I specifically reached out to you because you are someone who's an extreme artist and you really help people dream bigger and be bold and step into their bigger vision, which is what the podcast is all about. So I'm really looking forward to digging into how exactly you do that. But before we go there, I'd love it if you could share your journey with the audience. How did you get to be an extreme artist?
It's a great question. So I'm going to take you back. I could take you all the way back to the beginning. Actually, why don't I take you all the way back to the beginning very quickly, right? So this is going to be my life story now. So age 2, I have my first experience of painting. I'm at Mrs. Woodiott's, right? She runs a kindergarten in the local town. And I remember her inviting us into her kitchen of all places. And she put out this plastic matting. And we were there to do hand paintings. And I remember having this experience where I literally put my hand in the paint and I started to create something. And I'm like, oh my God, this is extraordinary. I'm 2, right? But it obviously imprinted so deeply on my memory that this was something I really wanted to do. Fast forward 14 years, and I'm now away at school, and this is still my dream. Like, I want to be an artist. And in most societies, and certainly, the society I grew up in the UK, art is not something that is massively supported, and it's not something that people necessarily promote. And so fast forward to the 16-year-old boy who's really painting to escape from the rugby field because he was rubbish at it, and escape from the cricket field because he was rubbish at that. But he still had a passion for art. And my dad comes to me and says, look, I've spoken to your art teacher and I've spoken to your mum, and neither of us think you're good enough to make enough money as a professional artist. And so here was my dream. Like, this was what I really wanted to do. And I knew, or I believed, without his support, I wouldn't be able to do it. So I stopped painting. I didn't paint, I didn't pick up a paintbrush properly for another 14 years. And during that time, I got depressed. I stopped eating properly and I drank in order to be able to be relaxed enough to eat, which is not a great combination. So I go away to university and I'm just drinking, 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 and then eating pizza and kebab at 3 o'clock in the morning, which I feel like saying, don't do this at home. And then I end up in the doctor's clinic a couple of times, and he says, you've now damaged your stomach lining, you need to stop drinking. And this kind of situation went on for 5 years. And then I leave university and I go and get a job on a marketing training program, which is what I thought I wanted to do. And 2 years into that, they come to me and they say, look, this isn't going very well. And we know normally we offer a job to people, but there isn't a job for you. And I was devastated again. I'd done what I thought I ought to do, follow the suggestions of my dad. And here I am, not doing something I love, and now being told that actually you're not very good at it. And part of the reason they said I wasn't good at it is because they said, well, you're not creative enough. So here's a boy of 2 who wants to be an artist, a boy of 16 who wants to be an artist, and a man of 25 who's being told they're not creative enough to work for not the most creative company in the world. And that started me on a journey. Within 6 weeks, I went on my first personal development program called the Landmark Forum. And I started to turn my life around. And I started to learn some tools that would help me. And 2 months after that, I got a job, interestingly, back at the same company, but working in their head office, working on something I was interested in, earning 50% more. And I was working on writing the first guidelines for internet marketeers. So this was 99. And then from there, I went into advertising. And from there, I helped to create the first web agency within the oldest ad agency in the world, and worked there for 3 years. And then realized that I was on the edge of a burnout. And at the same time, my partner at the time had lost her father. And she said, why don't we go somewhere exciting? And I said, well, why don't you go somewhere exciting? Why don't you go and sail a yacht? Because that's what you really want to do, go around the world yacht race, do a leg of that. She's like, no, 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 we need to do something together. So in the end, we ended up in Chamonix, which is not a million miles from here. And I taught her to ski for 4 weeks. And she said to me, you know what? You're really nice in the mountains. Like, you're a different person. I was like, oh, thanks for the compliment. And then I realized it wasn't a compliment. And within 6 months, I'd moved to this region. I'd moved to the Alps. And I was had a job in Geneva. I set up an agency inside a tech company. I worked there for 3 years, and then I set up another communications agency with the former partners of Saatchi and Saatchi in Geneva. And there we worked on some pretty amazing projects. I was running global campaigns for organizations like the Red Cross. And I got to work on all of the Sustainable Development Goals for UNICEF, World Health Organization, and big organizations like that. And at the same time, I had started to paint again. So I came to the mountains, and the mountains woke me up, and I started painting again. And I remember the first painting. There was all this creativity inside me, and I remember I cried throughout this painting. I was just in floods of tears. And it was inspired by a book by Paulo Coelho, who I didn't realize at the time actually lives just outside Geneva. And it was all about freedom. And I painted this painting, and it wasn't the best painting in the world. And I gave it to this woman who I'd moved to Geneva with, who'd inspired me to come here. And we split up in the meantime, but I still gave her the painting because it was thanks to her that I started to paint again. In fact, she'd asked me on my birthday a couple of years before, do you want to give up your job and I'll support you as an artist? And I wasn't courageous enough then to accept her offer. So there I am, I'm now painting, and I've subsequently bought a house, and I've created this studio, this atelier in the house, and I'm painting at nights like Jackson Pollock. You start painting at 10 o'clock in the evening and finish at 6 o'clock in the morning. And then at a certain point, one of my mentors, a spiritual astrologist, said to me, you need to go and paint outside. And that was the best thing that anyone had ever said to me. So here I'm doing all this work in the UN and struggling to make these things work because the culture of the organization isn't working. And then I'm painting at night and then eventually painting during the day outside. And going and painting outside is a totally different experience. In a studio, everything is fixed, right? The lighting's fixed, the temperature's fixed, the humidity's fixed. But when you go and paint outside, you've got wind, you've got temperature, you've got all the elements to play with. And I start to play with these elements, and it becomes this extraordinary kind of interaction with these elements. So it's less about actually creating a painting, it's more about exploring what happens when the temperature goes up, or the temperature freezes, or the wind gets up, or the mountain painting disappears behind the clouds, or it starts to snow, or it starts to rain. And I start to have these experiences which you can't really explain with Newtonian science. And to start with, I'm like, I'm going crazy. I can't explain this to anyone. Like, what I'm starting to experience, this is really, really strange. Anyway, these experiences continue, and I start to realize that actually change isn't something that happens outside us, change starts within. And as I realize this, and I get this kind of message that true change starts within, and I can tell story and story and story about how we actually create our environment, I realize this is exactly what these organizations need. So I have this insight. I'm like, oh my God, true change starts within. This is where change starts. And I take these to these organizations, and they're just not ready to hear it. And then I have this realization, but if you got it, we'd have realized the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It would already be done. But they're not ready to hear this message because the culture is so stuck in a hierarchical kind of top-down system, because the UN and all the organizations affiliated with it are membership organizations, and the memberships are governments. And if you know anything about a government, it's designed in a different paradigm to achieve a entirely different purpose. And so I'm looking at it going, well, how do I do this? So why did I start The Artist Inside, which is the organization that I've been leading for the last 8 years? I started because I couldn't not start it, because there's this deep calling inside me, this deep knowing that I had to do something. And what I was doing within the UN system and for these other NGOs is I was using communications to address a problem that could not be solved through communications and could not be solved by the people who I was reporting to. It could only be solved at the top of those organizations by changing the culture. And the people at the top of the organization weren't ready to change the culture. But what I discovered is that in order to change the culture, you would have to change the mindset. And in order to change the mindset, well, what I learned in the mountains could do that. But then I discovered you can't actually change somebody's mindset. That's just running the old system. You can only give somebody the tool. And when I realized that, I went on this journey to discover how could you do that? How could you help somebody? How could I share the insights that I learned in the mountains with other people? And that's an ongoing journey. It's an ongoing exploration of how true transformation happens, how we transform ourselves, and in the process, we transform our organizations and we transform the planet. And that's an ongoing experiment, which happens in the mountains, happens with individuals, teams, organizations, and it's just the most amazing, fantastic journey. So in hindsight, actually, the best thing that anyone's ever said to me is what my dad said to me when I was 16. Because if I hadn't have gone that low and been that depressed, I wouldn't know what it's like to be this high and to be able to help the people that I get to help. And that's just an incredible privilege.
Wow, what a story. I've been making a few notes of things that I'd like to dig into and just so many things, but I've had similar realizations, but from a different angle. And it's so interesting, isn't it, that this change, as you say, it comes from within, but it's not change. It has to be transformation because change can be fleeting. You can change your clothes several times a day, but a transformation is something really lasting and permanent. And that's what I think when it becomes really exciting. But as you say, so many people just aren't ready, particularly in the corporate world where it's all, everyone's scared about everything, which is why it's so freeing on the outside when you can just dive in and say, well, I can't not do this. Let's go for it. You couldn't do that in a corporate environment. So I love that you had that realization. But going back to that point when you were 16, and then everything that happened next, a lot of the clients I work with or the people I speak to, a lot of what holds them back and where the fear comes from is this idea that they're not good enough. And you have that memory of definitely being told you are not good enough. You cannot follow your dreams. Don't even think about it. So you said you went on this particular training or professional development program that shifted something in there. Do you remember what that shift was? Was it just one thing that then you think, oh, well, they were talking rubbish, I'm just going to go my own path? Or was it more of a process? That's probably about 10 questions in one there.
Yeah, no, great question. Actually, I didn't get the answer there. In fact, fascinatingly, I did the basic landmark forum and I did the advanced course and then I did self-expression and leadership. Those are the first three. And then I went into a kind of a branch of it, which was kind of more niche. And I can't remember what those programs were called, but in the first of those, they said, everyone has an unanswerable question. And the unanswerable question is a variant of, am I good enough? Am I good enough? Am I valuable enough? Am I lovable enough? Am I smart enough? Did I get it right? Am I beautiful enough? Am I sexy enough? All of these kind of exist, and we all have a variant of it. And they called this the unanswerable question. And they're like, you'll never answer it. And I was like, no, I don't buy that. But it took me 20 years to find the answer. And I really only discovered it relatively recently. So, am I good enough is doubt, basically. Will I make enough money? Will people still love me if I go down this path? Will I have enough time? Do I have, am I creative enough? Do I have enough resources to do this? What underlies that is doubt. And doubt is a pandemic way worse than anything we've seen on the planet recently. It stops all of us, or most of us, from doing what we love. And what I'm going to share is my insight into that because I think it's so valuable that it can't stay in only one community. So it's a combination of a number of different ideas, some of which come from a guy called Richard Rudd, who wrote a book called The Gene Keys. It took him 7 years to write it. It's the most extraordinary book I've ever read. He bases it on the I Ching, which is a 5,000-year-old book, which looks at the 64 different types of personality. And it's also based on the work of Peter Koenig, who is one of my partners, who invented something called reclamation work, which is how you actually truly go through the transformation you're talking about. And it's also based on David Hawkins' work, which is how you shift from destructive emotions into creative emotions. And it's also based on my work, which is how do you choose a constructive pathway, a constructive narrative, rather than a destructive narrative. So a destructive narrative is all about doubt. It's all about, I doubt myself or I doubt the other. A constructive narrative is I know it's going to work. Deep down, I know it's going to work. So how do you get into that? Well, doubt works in one of two ways. It's either doubt about the self or it's doubt about another. And when we repress doubt, what happens is we doubt ourselves. So we doubt whether we're good enough. We doubt whether we're smart enough. We doubt whether we're creative enough. We doubt whether we did it right. And that can be a very, very vicious downward spiral. Or we project it onto another, a relationship or a partnership. Your partner comes back late at night. You're like, where were you last night? Who were you with? Why did you say that? Are you serious about this company? Because so we doubt the other. One is repression, the other is projection. So there are these two forms of doubt that we have running inside us, one inside, one outside. And how do you break that? How do you break that vicious cycle? Well, most of the time it's because we're repressing something inside of us. So where does true transformation occur? True transformation has to happen inside. You have to go deep inside. And if you go all the way into the doubt, you go into all the feelings around that, what ultimately happens is that the doubt runs out, or at least the feeling runs out. Because actually beneath the doubt is a feeling. So the first part I just explained is Richard Rudd's insight. And what Richard Rudd said is you have to inquire. So the way that you inquire is you inquire, is this about me? Right? Is this my own self-doubt, my outer game self-doubt, my personality self-doubt, my mind doubting myself? Or is this actually my intuition doubting? Because if your intuition is doubting, then there's a fundamental truth here. It's like, well, don't do that. There's a sixth sense here. Don't do that because you're not actually being called to do that. And how we distinguish between those two is a really, really tricky thing to do. But the only way to distinguish between the two is actually to go into the doubt and what's beneath the doubt. So often what's beneath the doubt is kind of some of the things I talked about earlier. So I'm not creative enough, or I didn't do it right. So if you go into the emotion of that, what's I didn't do it right? Well, beneath that is shame. And according to Hawkins' work, shame is one of the lowest vibrations of any emotion that we can experience. In fact, according to his map of consciousness, it is the lowest emotion. And the only emotion beneath that is death. So, so he's calibrated scientifically all of these emotions from death at 0 up to peace at 600 and beyond that to stages of enlightenment, whatever that means, right? And shame is 20, right? So on a 1 to 1,000, shame is 20, and guilt, I think, from memory, it's 30. And if you look at Brené Brown's work, she talks about shame and guilt as two of the kind of lowest emotions, and you have to go through these emotions. So what is really at the heart of an ego doubt, an outer game doubt, a personality doubt, rather than an inner game doubt, is these kinds of emotions. So how do you stop that going on? You have to go into those emotions, shame, guilt, apathy, numbness, potentially anger, into these lower destructive emotions, because this is all the destructive pathway. And only then will you have a choice. Once you've embodied that and once you've felt that and released that energy from the body, only then will you end up being able to tell and distinguish between the two. But
Mm.
it's still there, right? The doubt still comes up. So then you have to use the mind, which is the second step of the process. So the first step is go into the feeling really deep, and it's horrible. Don't get me wrong, it's not a nice feeling to go into those emotions. The reason we suppress the emotion, because nobody wants to feel shame, nobody wants to feel guilt, nobody wants to feel anger, nobody wants to feel any of these things. But the reason that this happens is because we don't want to feel them. So the mind kicks in and goes, I don't want to go all the way down into that low energy because that means I'm as close to death as possible. And I'm terrified of going there. So I'm not going to take you there. So my purpose is to make you survive, because the mind disappears when the body dies, right? So the mind's like, no, I want to go all the way down to these energies. So I won't go down into these energies. So I will choose another pathway, and that pathway is doubt. But then you can't distinguish between the doubt of the inner and the doubt of the outer, the sixth sense that says, no, don't do that, because actually that isn't the right thing to do. So only when you've done that work that you have a choice, and can you go, okay, actually this doubt is taking me on my pathway, what I call the constructive pathway or the masterpiece pathway, and this doubt is the destructive pathway, the shadow pathway, the pathway which is taking me into just repeating the patterns that I've always repeated. So
Mm.
it's a very long answer to a very simple question, a little bit of a ramble, but I hope it made sense.
What I've found through my own work on this and guiding clients through it is that a lot of this destructive doubt that you talk about, once you dig into it, you realize it's not even yours.
Yeah.
When you see these images and hear the voices, well, that wasn't even mine. So it's really liberating to get rid of all of this stuff that is holding you back, that we have our own things that are holding us back and don't serve us anymore that we can get rid of, but so much of it isn't even ours. It's these misgivings or experiences that our parents have had or that have been passed down through our DNA and all of this. It is, as you say, it's never a comfortable experience going through this, but so worth it, because when you come away, you have a much clearer idea and you can make much more intentional decisions for yourself. And there's something you said there, and I said, I've heard that in so many of my clients. They have this doubt, can I really do this? But on the other flip side, they know they can. They know they can do it. They know they're smart. They've done this a million times before. But suddenly now they feel maybe a bit vulnerable, or, we can never know exactly what's going to happen in the future. So it's really interesting how you talked about, going down and finding these different strands of doubt and where they're coming from. And once you start to separate these and put them into some kind of logical sense that can help you, then you can use it to guide you forwards, which is really interesting.
Yeah, beautiful. Great summary. And you're right. It's about really distinguishing the threads, and you have to go down and down and down. Much easier to do with a guide or somebody to accompany you than yourself, because the mind kicks in and the mind goes, I'm not going there. And so it kicks in as this, it's like a circuit breaker, in an electrical circuit. If there's too much energy flowing through, it will cut the circuit. Same thing happens. The mind will kick in and will kick you out of the process until you've done it when you haven't done it. So to get down there, you really do need somebody to accompany you who's been there and who knows it, in order to get you beyond the circuit breaker. And it only happens when you get beyond the circuit breaker, and you can do that. And that's where the true creativity, the real artist inside, is unleashed.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I 100% agree, it's so hard to do this work on your own because you have these blind spots and you don't spot the patterns and sometimes the good things. We tend to focus on the negative. And I see this with my clients. They're saying something is a negative. I think, isn't that actually a really strong positive? I remember doing a SWOT exercise with a group years ago, and they had just so many weaknesses and they couldn't think of any strengths that they had. And yet when we dug into it, most of what they'd listed as weaknesses were actually strengths. They just hadn't recognized that yet. So it is a fascinating process to go through. So this is something that you take people through art. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, art is one of the modalities that we use, but it's difficult to do it through art only online. So, I mean, all of my work in the mountains, if you like, painting and experiencing the relationship between the climate and myself, is the basis of the work. But a lot of the work is done like this, online. So we run pathways online, we run pathways offline. When we run the offline pathways, yes, we use art, but we use art in a very different way, in order to express the emotion, in order to go deep, deep into that emotion, whether it be anger or vindictiveness or courage or shame or whatever it is. You can use art in a way to do that. Much harder to do online. And so we use different tools online. But as I say, everything is based on the insights I started to have when I was painting. And the way to summarize that is simply to say that, take this painting here, right? So I painted this in Norway in August, and you can see probably here from the clouds that it was a pretty variable day. In fact, it rained till 11 o'clock that day. And my friend Carrie, who we went to see there, she's one of my partners. She runs an organization called United Cities, which is kind of a parallel organization to the UN, and they're basically realizing the Sustainable Development Goals consciously, and they will actually do it. She's got the funding to do it, so it's kind of done as long as we all step up and make it happen. Anyway, she's bought a plot of land and she's building her own house on it, and it was painted just at the bottom, kind of overlooking the fields. And we got there at 12 because it had been raining, and it stopped raining. And the rain was coming in and out throughout the day. And partway through the painting, I realized, again, this fundamental truth. So I got a download, and the download was, I need to start a program called the Rainmaker. What's the Rainmaker? Well, all of these painting experiences have led me to conclude that when we resist whatever is outside us, it resists us. Easier to see in a relationship, right? You resist your partner will resist you. And that's how arguments start. But if you're like this with your partner and you do this, there's nothing for your partner to push back against. Well, the same works with the weather, believe it or not. I've painted in the snow. When you resist the snow resists you. When you resist the rain resists you. When you stop resisting the snow or the rain, it works with you to create something more powerful. Crazy as it sounds, always does it. The wind will blow through you and create a better canvas. No question. Like I've painted in 70, 80 kilometer an hour winds in Provence, in the Philippines, near the top of Mont Blanc. I've painted in minus 15 wind chill in Finland, in Russia. And every time when I stop resisting, something remarkable happens. And I can tell story and story and story about this thing. But the summary of it is really simple. When you stop resisting it, it stops resisting you. And in that moment, you realize you're not separate from it. And therefore you can influence any aspect of it,
Mm.
whatever you call it, right? And in that moment, you actually go beyond the mind. And that's where all mystical experiences happen, beyond the mind, what we refer to as miracles. And when you go to that state beyond the mind, the body and the mind become a tool. And this is where I think most of us miss out. So we get the things like, the first part of the journey, which we've just described, which is the point where you've gone into these deep emotions, what Peter refers to as reclamation work, but everyone has their own variant of it. It's like going deep, deep into that. And Michael Singer in his book, he talks about the surrender experiment, the idea of surrendering to the emotion. But there's a second step in the process, and this is the key. And the second step is that once you've gone beyond the mind into whatever you call that, I call it the inner game or the artist inside us, then the most powerful tool we have as a human being is our mind. So if you're out of the body, if your spirit has left the body, you don't have so much influence on the planet. You don't have a body, you don't have a mind. So the body, hands, well, they can create something. Feet, they can kick something. But you also have a mind which is even more powerful than the body. So the mind is a transmitter and a receiver. But most of us are misusing the mind. Most of us are going on the destructive journey with the mind. And consequently, what we're putting out there is what we're getting back. So we're in destructive mode all the time, self-sabotage, which is where the doubt comes in and why you end up going on this journey of not being good enough. But that second step of the process is the most important, and very, very few of us get here, which is how do you consciously use the mind in order to put out the message that you want? And this is what we refer to as manifestation. But without the first step, manifestation doesn't work. So the secret, the real secret, is you have to do the deep inner work to go into those deep emotions around doubt or whatever it is, shame, vulnerability, guilt, whatever it is, in order then to be able to truly use the mind to send out the message which is crystal clear. Otherwise, the message becomes crackly. It's like one of those old wireless receivers, and you get a really crackly signal coming back. You're going out, well, you get a crackly signal coming back, and then you'll have to smack the top of the TV. That's effectively what we're doing. So that to me is the key. And you can do that with a relationship, you can do that with a business, you can do that with money, you can do that with energy, you can do that with creativity, you can do that with the climate, you can do that with your environment. Basically, everything in the entire universe works on the same principle.
Fascinating. And when you were saying about this idea of stop resisting, and I think it's something that makes sense, but then you think, well, for a lot of people, we're probably not aware that we are resisting. We're just doing the same old thing. We're not necessarily aware. So yeah, doing that deep work first, so then you just are more conscious of when things aren't flowing, you are coming against resistance, and then you can say, well, that's interesting. Where is this coming from? What should I be letting go, and where should I be surrendering, and go with that? And I suspect we've all experienced moments of this. I remember a time, so I went to art school, I did design management, so it wasn't all about art, but I was always very consciously trying to create something specific. And then I just remembered one evening, and something just got me, and I sat down with felt pens, which I never used, and a sketch pad, and I just created these beautiful beings. And I still remember it. It was just like nothing else that I've ever created. And I think it was that moment where I wasn't trying to do anything, but just allow the art to come through me. And yeah, it was magical. But then I've never been able to get back to that because then you're like trying to create that specific moment again, which of course has gone. And I'm sure in our relationship, in our work, we've all had these moments where it feels, as you say, like a miracle has just happened or a little sense of what that could be. So I can imagine if you can go through this process and open up to that more consciously, then what's on the other side must be just so exciting. So part of me is thinking, it sounds magical, but part of me feels, but it also sounds a bit scary and overwhelming. How does it
Yeah.
feel on the other side?
Well, it's not really the other side. It's actually who we are. It's magical. I mean, you just described it beautifully. And, these beings kind of just appeared through you. You are created through. There is no mind really engaged in that moment, or the mind is quiet. The inner critic, as Julia Cameron puts it, is not chattering away. It's like you're still using the mind, but the mind is focused entirely on the task in front of you. Often we say the difference between men and women is women can multitask and do many, many different things, and men can focus. And this is where creativity comes from, through the feminine. And this is where the masculine comes from. And you need both of these actually, but not fighting each other in harmony. The masculine, the structure, the easel, if you like, to the canvas. And then the feminine has the confidence to come out and play. So what does that feel like? It feels like a state of bliss. Now, you say you've experienced it once, but if I was to ask you a question, my guess is that you would actually come up with many, many other moments. And the question is a very simple one. And I suspect everyone who's watching this will be able to answer this as well. When do your best ideas come to you? The kind of answers I get are, first thing in the morning, last thing at night, when I'm in the shower, when I'm in the bath, when I'm on the toilet, when I'm in the train, plane, when I'm driving, when I'm cooking, when I'm reading, when I'm gardening, when I'm talking, when I'm in the gym, when I go for a run, when I'm in nature, when I'm in the woods, like all of these different things. So then the question is, well, what links all of those things together? And the answer is when you get out of your mind. Vincent van Gogh said, I paint with my heart and my soul. In the process, I lost my mind. Of course, we focus on the fact that he lost his mind. But we don't focus on the fact that the secret is to go out of your mind, literally, which we think is craziness. But that's what every single master did. And the only difference between master and you and I is a master can sustain that state for long enough during the act of creation. So what emerges is mastery. So they
Mm.
go out of the mind and then use the mind. And yes, it is a state of bliss. And you've experienced it, and I've experienced it. And if we hadn't experienced it, we wouldn't even be able to have this conversation. It just wouldn't exist. But we've experienced it. Even if you can't consciously remember, you were actually out of your mind when you were born. There was no mind. Like the mind doesn't kick in until about the age of 2, and then it's not fully developed until the age of 12. And that area between, like, we know that because you can look at brainwaves. So, delta brainwaves, age 0 to 2, theta brainwaves, 2 to 7, alpha brainwaves, 7 to 12, onwards, beta brainwaves. Most adult conversations are in beta brainwaves, but all revelations will come through primarily in alpha. The deep work, in theta, which we get into in light sleep, light hypnosis, and light meditation, deep hypnosis, deep meditation, deep sleep, delta brainwaves. That's where we heal the body. That's where we process the information. This is where the ideas come out, and this is where we act. But most of the time, we're only acting in here. We're only spending all our time over here, and we're not going and resourcing ourselves over here in order to do that. But when we go and we create from the inner rather than the outer, it's pure bliss.
So inspirational. And I think what you've touched on is something that's come out of, I think, just about every interview we've had so far on the show. It's more than 100 interviews. Is this, you don't need anything more. You don't need more certifications or anything like this. You just need to focus on the inside, develop that intuition, or not develop the intuition, it's already there, but you tune into that and really understand that core essence of what you are. And then you probably don't even need the courage to live it. It will just come and take you in that next step, which is, yeah, a journey, a process. But I think you've inspired everyone. It's worth taking.
Oh, it's the journey of your life. In fact, depending on your belief system, it's the journey of many lifetimes. And this is why we're here. Why are you here? This might push some people, but why bother? Why put yourself in a body again? Why? Like this a massive, expansive spirit. Why trap yourself in a human form? Why incarnate? Why bother? Why choose to do that? Life is not easy on this planet in this dimension. So why would you do that?
Yeah.
Gandhi, like the soul chooses the body, chooses the parents. Why? What, to be trapped, to be in pain, to suffer, to struggle, or to experience bliss?
Great question to ponder on and spur you into taking those next steps. Talking of which, you've covered so much today and really given so many different and exciting insights, I think. Is there anything you would like to leave the audience with that perhaps we haven't touched on, or something that you feel would give people that extra nudge to start this journey?
Yeah, so if I just go back to that question, when do your best ideas come to you? When do your best ideas come to you? And just think about that, right? Is it in the shower? Is it as you fall asleep? Is it as you wake up? And if you really want to simplify your life, do what you love, experience more bliss, just see if you can extend that time just a little bit. I realize sometimes that means like the children don't get to eat till later. I get that. But see if you can just extend that time a little bit, lying in bed in the morning, or extend the time in the shower, or extend the time on the walk. Because I guarantee if you spend more time in that space, which is the alpha brainwaves, you're going to get more inspiration coming through. It has to be that way. So whatever it is for you, just extend that a little bit. Therein lies the secret of all creation.
Wonderful. And so doable and attractive. I'm really open to more time relaxing in the bath and away from not feeding the kids. Alexander, thank you so much for really taking us on such an extraordinary journey today. If people want to know more about your work and how this all works, and your books, of course, as well, what's the best place for them to find you?
Well, just go to my website. In fact, even easier than that, my name appears at the bottom here. Google my name, you'll find my website. Go on my website. You'll find a link there to all the different pathways that we run, a link to the book. You can download the book now for free, or you can buy it. This explains the entire journey. Or subscribe to my weekly Insights from the Atelier, which is a weekly conversation with me and with guests. And I would love at some point, Melitta, for you to come and join us if you would be open to that. And maybe we can flip the tables and we can do it here in my atelier because you just live down the road
Yeah,
from me or up the road from me.
we've just become very close neighbors, which is wonderful. So, yeah, thank you. I'd love to take you up on that invitation. So, Alexander, thank you so much again for being here today. And yeah, I look forward to flipping the tables. Thank you so much. It's been really inspirational.
Likewise, really appreciate it. Thank you for holding the space and looking forward to the next conversation.
Yeah, me too.